The heartbreaking discovery of the bodies of 6 hostages who had been murdered just shortly before Israeli soldiers found them in the underground tunnels of Gaza last Sunday has once again broken Israeli society's hearts. I'm Hanan Lishinsky, and today on this All Israel News Update we will look at the turmoil that has happened in Israel after the gruesome discovery of 6 Israeli hostages thought to have been alive who were murdered by Hamas terrorists in the tunnels of Gaza. The 6 bodies were found by IDF soldiers in a tunnel, one of Hamas's numerous terror tunnels under the city of Rafah in the Gaza Strip last Sunday. After being brought to Israel, forensic examinations showed that they had been executed by shots to the head and other body parts just shortly before Israeli soldiers managed to reach them. Forensic evidence suggests that they were murdered probably 2 to 3 days at the most before IDF soldiers found them and found their bodies and brought them back to Israel to their families for burial. Following the gruesome discoveries, Israeli society experienced an outpouring of grief and protest and anger. Hundreds of thousands poured into the streets in the big cities as well as on street junctions, highway junctions across the country. In Tel Aviv alone, there were an estimated 500,000 people, according to the protest organizers, who gathered and demonstrated, many calling for an immediate hostage deal to free the hostages, while others, it has to be said, also carried slogans accusing Netanyahu of not doing enough or even preventing a hostage deal. Many of the protesters gave expression to their anger specifically at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Many also carried signs saying things like "Bibi is a murderer," suggesting that he, as I said, prevented a hostage deal and keeps preventing a hostage deal, keeps creating new conditions to prevent a hostage deal in order to prolong his government's life. So they're saying that for political reasons, just to stay in his seat and stay in power, Netanyahu doesn't want a hostage deal and is basically murdering the hostages. This is what an extreme part of the protesters has been saying. And the police said that 29 protesters were arrested during the Tel Aviv protests for clashing with the police. And we saw protests also here in Jerusalem and in the greater area here. And according to police, the slogan "Bibi is a murderer" was also smeared on a car that belongs to the Prime Minister's convoy. So very concerning developments here in Israel in recent days, following again the discovery of the hostage bodies in Gaza. Now, to understand the potential significance of the Histadrut's call, it's important to note that the Histadrut once upon a time was responsible for almost every single worker in this country. Israel started as a socialist country where 99% of workers were organized under the Histadrut, and such a general strike even 20-30 years ago would have completely stopped the whole economy in its tracks. However, in recent decades, the liberalization of Israel's economy has already curtailed the Histadrut's influence. Now, over the past few years, the Histadrut has drifted more and more into the political left, meaning that the political right wing doesn't listen to it as much maybe as in the past. This was underscored by what actually happened on Monday. After the Histadrut called its general strike, almost every sector of the economy was threatened to be impacted by this. Public transportation, for example, even Ben Gurion Airport, the country's only international airport, was at first reported to be completely stopping its flights. However, what actually happened was the government quickly turned to a labor court saying that the strike was political. It wasn't motivated by concern for workers' rights, but it was politically motivated to influence the government policy, and as such was illegal. Now, the labor court agreed with the government's stance and actually struck down the general strike, declared it illegal, and forced the Histadrut labor union to end the strike early, already around 2 p.m. or something like that. In addition, as I said, large parts of the economy, especially or even workers in government offices which are now controlled by the right wing, didn't participate in the strike. Parts of public transportation, for example, didn't participate in the strikes. Right-wing municipalities, especially those in Judea and Samaria, but also Jerusalem, for example, which has a large religious conservative population, didn't participate in the strike because they agreed with the government, saying that this is a political strike aimed at changing the legitimate policy of a democratically, after all, elected government, and therefore they didn't participate. So this strike didn't reach much success. It already ended around 2 p.m., but it was a dramatic development in that even a few years ago, such a general strike was looked at as the nuclear option that the political left has in its pocket to increase public pressure on the government. And the fact that this basically failed and didn't do anything to change government policy must be seen as significant in this regard. However, the combined effect of the somewhat failed general strike, together with the large-scale protests that continued on Monday, after Sunday already had seen massive protests. On Monday they continued. We had demonstration and counter-demonstrations in the capital of Jerusalem. All of this forced Netanyahu to do something which the Prime Minister hasn't done a lot in recent months. Since the war began, he held a public press conference in order to defend his policies and speak to the nation, address the people on what is going on. Prime Minister Netanyahu, in a televised address that stretched to over an hour, including a question and answer section in the end, gave an overview of where we are, where the war effort is, and what his policies are, and why he is pursuing them. So at the beginning, he started by, again, very unusual comments by him. He, with apparent tears in his eyes, apologized to the families of the hostages, saying that he personally didn't do enough, we didn't do enough, he said, including the government and the security forces, and took responsibility, apologized to the families, and thanked the IDF and the rest of the security systems for their efforts in recovering the hostage bodies from Gaza. However, in more typical Netanyahu fashion, he quickly pivoted, went on the attack, and criticized his critics, excoriated his critics for their attacks against him. During his one-hour speech, he pointed out numerous times that he had the largest experience in hostage negotiations among Israel's leadership. So a big part of the criticism against him is that Netanyahu is standing against the advice of the security officials from the IDF, the Shin Bet, the Internal Domestic Service, who are saying that Netanyahu should do more to reach a hostage deal because the hostages, as we saw, are dying in captivity. Now Netanyahu, the big point of his speech was to emphasize that he will not withdraw Israeli forces from the Gaza-Egypt border. To that effect, he also presented a map. In typical, again, Netanyahu fashion, he had a stick pointing to different points on the map and explaining his rationale behind his conviction that Israel will not withdraw from this line, from this Gaza-Egypt border, which has been Hamas's lifeline, where it gets its weapons and equipment, tunnel digging machines and everything else. So Netanyahu went on the attack. He said that nobody in Israel's security system and establishment has more experience than he has. He pointed out that he, in the past, during his army service, was wounded during operations to rescue Israeli hostages, and also pointed out that he knows part of what the families are feeling because he himself has gone through this. So his brother, Yoni Netanyahu, was actually killed during an IDF operation to rescue hostages in Uganda, if you remember this. I'm personally too young to have experienced it myself. The message that received the most coverage in the Arab media as part of Netanyahu's speech was actually the sentence that he repeated, I think, twice, turning directly to Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and saying, forget about it. Forget it, we're not going out of the Philadelphia corridor, we're not withdrawing from there. So he again attacked Hamas. He said that they're cold-blooded murderers who murder hostages, and just emphasized that Israel cannot deal with them, and that Hamas isn't really interested in a hostage deal, and that it is Hamas rather than Netanyahu, as his critics say, who is blocking the negotiations, isn't interested in a hostage deal, and is only interested in more bloodshed. To underline this, Netanyahu pointed out, again, numerous times, the speech went on for an hour, so he repeated many of the points, but he pointed out numerous times that US State Secretary Antony Blinken, as well as the CIA Deputy Director, both in public statements in recent days supported Netanyahu's position. They affirmed that Netanyahu had approved the US proposals, while Hamas continues rejecting them. Unfortunately, here in Israel, society was once again split in regards to its reaction to Netanyahu's speech. As you may or may not know, Israeli society is pretty much divided 50%, 50% for and against Netanyahu. So Netanyahu's critics again criticized Netanyahu for his speech, pointing out factual errors that they say, pointing out that Netanyahu had delayed many of the decisions regarding the war, and especially what would happen after the war, and saying that this was part of the failure to reach a hostage deal. On the other hand, a media that is more right-wing, more hawkish, more known to be pro-Netanyahu, praised Netanyahu for his speech, for his communication, for his explanation of his policy, which personally, if I might add, I think Netanyahu clearly communicated his stance, but he doesn't really communicate a lot at all with Israeli society, and that is why this press conference was so rare. He gave maybe a handful of press conferences during the course of the war, and many of his explanations and of his announcements have come through anonymous sources and media leaks, and that is part of the problem. Interestingly, amid the whole turmoil and the whole balagan, as we say in Hebrew, which means turmoil and chaos, the Jewish People's Policy Institute released a recent poll that suggests something very interesting. Despite Israeli society being deeply divided over Netanyahu or no Netanyahu, a plurality of Israeli society agrees on the principles laid out by Netanyahu, meaning they prefer that Israel and the Israeli army stay in the Philadelphia corridor and keep preventing Hamas from rearming, even at the price of a hostage deal. Unfortunately, our society at the moment is polarized to a degree that even if Netanyahu presents arguments that most or even just a plurality of Israelis agree with, there is no effect on the public opinion, there is no effect on whether there are demonstrations or no. And this is the sad state that Israel is in at the moment after 10, almost 11 gruesome months of fighting in Gaza, in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, Lebanon, Syria, and almost every one of its borders. To continue receiving updates on this fighting and on the latest political developments within Israel, visit us at allisrael.com or on our social media channels.